Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back. Today, at the request of Exaflex, we will be discussing the history of USS North Carolina, BB-55, the Showboat of the Navy. Battleship North Carolina, BB-55, was a massive milestone for United States battleship design, being the first fast battleship of the U.S. Navy and the first battleship built in the United States in almost 20 years. The last ship built before her was the Colorado-class battleship West Virginia. North Carolina was the largest battleship built by the United States until the introduction of the Iowa class. She was 728 feet 9 inches long with a beam of 108 feet 4 inches and a draft of nearly 33 feet. The battleship weighed in at 35,000 long-ton standard displacement and 44,800 tons full load displacement. She had a maximum speed of 28 knots, powered by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, driving 4 screws and generating 121,000 horsepower. North Carolina had a maximum range of 17,450 nautical miles at a speed of 15 knots. North Carolina had a decent armor scheme, with a maximum armor thickness of 12 inches on the belt, 16 inches on the turrets, 5.5 inches on the deck, and 14.7 inches on the conning tower. The battleship had the strongest main battery of any battleship in the world at the time of her commissioning, with a main battery of 9 Mark VI 16-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, a super-firing pair forward, and a single turret aft. She had a secondary armament of 20 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns, with 5 dual mounts on either side of the ship, totaling 10 guns per side. Finally, she boasted an AA armament of 44 20mm Oerlikon guns, 15 Bofors 40mm quad mounts, and the previously mentioned 5-inch guns. Finally, North Carolina carried 3 float planes, with 2 catapults on the aft end of the ship for those planes. North Carolina and her sister Washington were to be constructed under the restrictions of the London Naval Treaty of 1936. The class went through a variety of designs, 4 of which were more heavily considered than others. The first of these designs resembled the British Nelson class, with 3 turrets mounted forward. However, these would have been 14-inch guns instead of the Nelson's 16-inch guns. And the 5-inch secondary battery would have been in 4 triple mounts, totaling 12. The second design was by far the strangest of the group, which had a flight deck on the front of the ship and 2 quadruple 14-inch turrets on the rear, making this design more of a battle carrier than an actual battleship. The third design returned to the older ideology of the standard type of American battleship, with 12 14-inch guns and 4 triple turrets, mounting a super-firing pair on either end of the ship. This design also considered the triple 5-inch gun alongside the traditional 5-inch dual mount. The fourth and final design is by far the most well-known. This design carried 3 quadruple 14-inch turrets, a super-firing pair forward, and a single turret aft. This design is presented as the premium battleship Florida in-game. The Florida design was the most developed of the 4. Due to further changes in the London Naval Treaty, however, the 16-inch guns were now permitted to be used on battleships. As a result, the Florida design would be modified into what we know today as the North Carolina class of battleships. North Carolina was laid down at the New York Naval Shipyard on October 27, 1937. She would be christened and launched by Isabel Hoey, daughter of the governor of North Carolina, on June 13, 1940. After the entire ship was finished with construction, North Carolina would officially join the fleet, being commissioned on April 9, 1941. The battleship would embark on her shakedown cruise in the Caribbean Sea soon after. Once this cruise was completed, she would patrol the United States water for the rest of the year. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, North Carolina was put into extensive combat training to prepare for the now inevitable involvement in the Second World War. She earned the title Showboat because of an issue with the ship. The hull would vibrate at certain speeds during her sea trials and construction. She would constantly have to return to the Navy Yard to get this issue addressed and her propellers replaced many times. Crowds would gather around the New York area and watch the ship pass by and under the Brooklyn Bridge, almost as if the ship was putting on a show for the people. The first operation for the battleship would be on April of 1942. This mission was meant to block and counter any potential combat operation carried out by the German battleship Tirpitz. North Carolina, however, would not participate in this role for long, being replaced by the battleship South Dakota. allowing North Carolina to transfer to the Pacific Fleet. She would cross the Panama Canal on June 10th with fleet carrier Wasp, escort carrier Long Island, and 9 destroyers. On June 15th of 1942, she would be assigned to Task Force 18, centered around USS Wasp CV-7. At the start of the Guadalcanal campaign, North Carolina would be assigned to Task Force 16. This force comprising of North Carolina herself, light cruiser Atlanta, heavy cruiser Portland, 6 destroyers, and the legendary USS Enterprise CV-6. This was part of the larger Task Force 61. The force was sent to cover the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal and take control of the under-construction airfield located there. The battleship would provide AA coverage for Enterprise on the opening day of the invasion, August 7, 1942. However, fear of Japanese torpedo bombers caused Admiral Fletcher to withdraw the fleet. A few weeks later, during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, August 24th to 25th of 1942, North Carolina was once again on escort duty for Enterprise. During this, the Japanese would send out a force of 80 attack aircraft on the task force. During this engagement, North Carolina would unleash a barrage of anti-aircraft fire so intense, the captain of Enterprise, Admiral Thomas Kincaid, radioed the battleship asking if the ship was on fire. Apparently, so much AA fire was being dispersed from the battleship that the Allied units of the fleet thought that North Carolina was on fire and heavily damaged from enemy hits. This couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, the battleship had sustained no damage and only 1 casualty from strafing fire. She had shot down anywhere between 7 to 14 planes during the engagement. Enterprise, however, had taken damage, meaning she had to return to the United States for repairs. This also meant that North Carolina had to be reassigned to Task Force 17, centered around USS Saratoga. She would operate off the coast of Guadalcanal for a few weeks. During this time, Japanese submarines attempted to strike the battleship with torpedoes twice. The first attempt was a failure. The second, however, was a spread of 6 torpedoes fired by submarine I-19. 1 hit the destroyer O'Brien, 2 hit the carrier Wasp, and a 4th hit North Carolina on the port side, which tore a 32 by 18-foot hole in the ship below the waterline. This hit inflicted little overall damage to the ship. It did, however, incapacitate the forward turret and gave the ship a 5.5-degree list to the port side. The other ships that were struck, Wasp and O'Brien, would eventually sink from the damage inflicted by the attack. North Carolina would head to Pearl Harbor for repairs, which lasted from September 30th to November 17th. She would then return to action in the Pacific, performing more screening and escort duty around USS Saratoga. The battleship would conduct this duty and support the Solomon Island landings with sister ship Washington for the remainder of 1942 and into the year of 1943. In early 1943, North Carolina was participating in convoy escort duty along South Dakota-class battleship Indiana. In March, North Carolina returned to Pearl Harbor for a minor refit, which installed an improved radar and improved fire control equipment. Upon her return to active duty, she was assigned to Task Force 36, alongside Indiana and fellow museum ship Massachusetts. Together, these ships would support Operation Cartwheel, lasting from late June to early July of 1943. This operation was meant to isolate the Japanese stronghold on Rabaul. She would return to Pearl once again in September to prepare for the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. For the invasion of the Gilbert Islands, North Carolina was assigned to Task Force 50. She was once again assigned to a subgroup centered around USS Enterprise. She would remain in this task group for the invasion of the Marshall Islands and for the majority of the next 3 months. She was detached from Task Force 50 on December 8th of 1943, alongside battleships Massachusetts, Indiana, South Dakota, and Washington, to prepare for the second invasion of the Marshalls. On January 6th of 1944, North Carolina would be found conducting shore bombardment duties during the Battle of Kwajalein, alongside the 4 previously mentioned battleships. She would then be transferred to Task Group 58.3, where she would participate in the Operation Hailstone in February. The results of this attack were very good. The Japanese would lose 39 ships and 315 aircraft be put out of service. Although not participating in the D-Day landings, North Carolina was part of a shore bombardment operation on the 6th of June. She would cover the Saipan landings in addition to giving AA cover to Allied carriers. Here she would remain until June 15th. On June 18th, 1944, North Carolina and Washington were en route to the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The two sisters were the first ships to open fire on the attacking Japanese aircraft. North Carolina herself would shoot down 2 of these enemy planes. But this was all she did during the battle, primarily because it was fought between carriers. Afterward, the battleship would head to the Puget Sound Navy Yard for a refitting. For the remainder of 1944, North Carolina was active in the Philippines campaign, performing more shore bombardment duties. On December 15th of 1944, North Carolina was caught in Typhoon Cobra. The battleship herself was not seriously damaged in any way, but 3 destroyers were lost in the storm. For the sake of time, I will quickly sum up the remainder of her active duties for the rest of the war. The battleship would participate in the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. She would then escort her task group during the attack on Kyushu. She would escort the damaged carriers Franklin and Bunker Hill back home after they took serious damage by kamikazes on March 22, 1945. She would continue to escort her carriers during the multiple air raids on the Japanese home islands during the summer of 1945. By the end of the war, North Carolina was assigned Task Force 11 alongside the New Mexico class of battleships. For Operation Magic Carpet, North Carolina would receive 12 battle stars for her active service in the United States Navy. USS North Carolina was decommissioned on June 27, 1947 and placed into reserve. Since the North Carolina-class battleships were larger than the succeeding South Dakota-class, they were more heavily considered for reactivation and modernization in 1954 alongside the Iowa-class. The plans were to increase the maximum speed to 31 knots by removing the rear turret and to increase speed. There was also plans to remove all the main and secondary guns to convert the ship into a helicopter carrier. However, none of these plans were carried out, and the ship was never modernized. On June 1, 1960, North Carolina was stricken from the Naval Register and was to be broken up for scrap. However, a foundation headed by James Craig were able to purchase the battleship from the Navy for $250,000 and turn her into a museum ship. The Battleship North Carolina Memorial officially opened as a museum in Wilmington, North Carolina on April 29, 1962. There she remains today as an attraction for all to see. North Carolina is the Tier 6 tech tree battleship for the alternate line of American battleships in World of Warships Legends. She is widely considered the best battleship at the tier, due to her sharing many stats with the likes of Tier 7 battleships, most notably the South Dakota class in-game, including Alabama and Massachusetts. I highly recommend her. Thank you for sticking around and watching the video. Once again, I would like to thank my friend Exaflex for requesting this video. Remember to leave a comment on your request, and if you're the first one to be there, I will use your request for the next video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.